And to the German capital, Berlin, because Ben Aris is waiting for us. He's the editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews. Ben, you know how much I like talking to you. Your analysis teaches me, at least, a lot. Let me get this right. You won't like it if I get it wrong. I believe you're the second longest-serving foreign correspondent to have worked in Russia. And with that in mind, what are your contacts in Moscow telling you?
Well, we're waiting to see. It's embargo day, and the scheme has come in. The price cap has been set at $60, and now we're going to see how well it works. And I must say, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of moving parts here. But what we can say is that it will definitely cost Russia money, and that it will reduce its exports and production. But what we don't know is how effective this is going to be. It's at the end of the day, it's the G7 plus a few countries that have adopted this, whereas the rest of the world is not on board. China and India particularly have now overtaken Europe and are the biggest importers of Russian crude, and they're not necessarily going to participate in this scheme. And there's various problems with it's going to be enforced by insurance, which is 95% controlled by London. However, Russia has massively recapitalized its own insurance company and is going to offer that insurance from a Russian company. But it's not clear who's going to accept that insurance. That the Turks and the Indians have already said that they will accept the Russian insurance, but the Chinese are sitting on the wall, which potentially could be a big blow. And finally, there's going to be a lot of leakage. Russia's doubled its tanker fleet in the last couple of months, and it has about 200 tankers. It probably needs more than that if it's going to, bypass these sanctions by sending oil on its own tankers. But there's other games that have been played with ship-to-ship transfers in the middle of the ocean to hide the identity of the oil. And all of these things remain to be seen how it's going to play out. But bottom line is that Russia exports some 2.5 million barrels a day to Europe, and analysts are predicting anything between 500,000 and 1.5 million drop in that. And that oil is too much for the rest of the world to absorb, and there's not enough tankers to move it. So there will be an impact.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned India, because India's imports of Russian oil have increased a massive amount over the past 12 months. And actually, Russia isn't it? It's selling that oil to India already at a discount. Okay, but I want to come on to what's happening in terms of the fighting. I saw a report which said that recently, in fact, it was November, Russian troops that were sent to Luhansk were told by their commanding officers, "You're here because you're meat." And then I've seen some pictures on very reputable news websites which claim to show Russian soldiers in basements, in rooms of houses where they're almost being kept prisoner by their own commanding officers. What do you know about the morale of the Russian troops? I personally haven't revisited this theme for a few months. What's happening with the Russian soldiers on the ground?
Well, the morale is famously bad, and when the Kharkiv offensive started, the Ukrainian forces went through the Russian forces that are based around Kharkiv and into the north of the Donbass region. They went through it like a knife through butter. The Russian defense just completely collapsed. And now they've retreated back. I mean, having taken all of Luhansk region, the Russians now lost a big chunk of it. And what they're trying to do now is to take it back. I think the war goal for Putin at this point is simply to conquer the whole Donbass. And at that point, he's probably prepared to talk about stopping a ceasefire of some sort. And also, they've had the partial mobilization that happened in September, 300,000 new troops. But these guys are basically press ganged, forced to go. And the morale amongst them is very low indeed. They simply don't want to be there. And they've been poorly equipped and practically trained not at all. And there's reports that, these guys have been two weeks on the front before they get killed, and the body bags are already going back. But it's Russia. I mean, that's how they fight their wars. They've always done it that way. They've done it badly, but they have enormous numbers of people, and they just keep throwing them into the fight. And as you say, I mean, the threats, the discipline for those who don't want to fight is severe. And bottom line is that even if these soldiers are poorly trained and poorly equipped, there's still a man with a gun, and there's now, I think, about 180,000 of that 300 have already been deployed, and you've got another 120,000 on the way. And they're simply going to put bodies in the way, and the Ukrainian forces are going to have to come through those. And that's not easy at all, because this war has now become a defensive war. Both sides have dug in. The Ukrainians have advanced as far as the line that's been there for 8 years. You have to remember this war has actually been going on since 2014. And that's much better defended. And it's going to be very difficult for Ukrainians to make much more territorial gains. Now they're coming back to the core positions that Russia has held for 8 years.
Ben, over the course of the war, is that now the conclusion you think is most likely, that Vladimir Putin will want to take complete control of the Donbass and will then negotiate a possible peace deal from there? Because if that is his position, what would Vladimir Zelensky's position be in terms of if that was the offer?
It's difficult to say. Look, my working hypothesis is that I think you have the question that's up in the air is to what extent do both sides think this war is unwinnable militarily. And I think it's been made clear to the Russians that is unwinnable. I mean, the most they can hope for is to secure the rest of Donbass. You know, any aspirations they had to go on to Odessa and further west and link up with Moldova, which was the point of taking Kherson in the first place as a strategic head in order to launch that offensive, has been abandoned. I mean, they've given up on that plan, which is why they retreated from Kherson and taken up a defensive position on the east side of the Dnieper River. As for Zelensky, in March and April, there was very serious peace talk effort that came very close to a deal. But the Ukrainians now are so incensed, so outraged, that I don't think Zelensky is prepared to even contemplate a ceasefire. They're just going to fight to the bitter end until they've ejected Russia. But like as I say, that's very difficult to do, and there's a certain fatigue that's building up in Europe because of the consequences, the economic consequences of the energy crisis. And the West holds the key card here because Ukraine cannot supply itself. Its industry has been largely destroyed, and so it's entirely dependent on the West. And if the West loses its enthusiasm for this and starts slowing down supply of weapons, then that will force Zelensky into talks, which will be very difficult for him. The Ukrainian population is pretty much unanimous that they want to fight to the bitter end. They're not prepared to give up.
Ben Aris, thank you so much indeed, Ben.